It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Harold sat alone in his living room, the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock cutting through the silence. His eyes drifted to a dusty shelf where a faded postcard from Paris rested, the Eiffel Tower etched in sepia against a sky he'd never seen. At 75, retirement had stretched into a haze of empty days, and that postcard, a relic from his decades-long habit of collecting them, was a bittersweet reminder of dreams he'd let slip away. Once he'd imagined traveling the world, each postcard a promise of adventure. Now they gathered dust much like Harold himself in a house that felt more like a museum of his past than a home. The stillness was suffocating. From his window he watched the neighborhood hum with life, children racing to school, neighbors swapping stories over picket fences, but it all seemed a world apart. His routine was simple, almost mechanical. Coffee at dawn, a newspaper he barely read, and hours spent in an armchair that creaked under the weight of his solitude. His daughter visited when she could, but 2 hours was a long drive and those visits were fleeting. Harold was alone with his thoughts, tracing the worn edges of that Paris postcard in his mind, wondering where the years had gone. Then came the knock. It was soft, hesitant, breaking the monotony of his afternoon. Harold shuffled to the door, half expecting a lost deliveryman, but instead found Mrs. Thompson, the widow next door, holding a covered dish. "I made too much stew," she said, her smile warm as sunlight. "Thought you might like some." The scent of herbs and slow-cooked beef drifted up as she handed it to him, a small kindness that caught him off guard. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rusty from disuse. She lingered a moment. "The community garden could use some help, you know, if you're ever looking for something to do." That night, as he ate the stew, its warmth spreading through him like a memory, he thought of his late wife and the roses they'd once tended together. Gardening had been their quiet joy, now buried under years of neglect. Maybe, he thought, it wasn't too late to dig into the earth again. The next morning, Harold stood at the edge of the community garden, a patchwork of green tucked between houses. Sunflowers swayed in the breeze, tomatoes gleamed red, and the air carried the sharp, fresh scent of soil. Volunteers bustled about, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees. He approached a woman with soil-streaked hands, her grin welcoming. "I'm Harold," he said, tentative. "Mrs. Thompson sent me." She handed him gloves and pointed to a weed-choked bed. "Start there. We're all learning together." Kneeling, Harold felt the cool earth beneath him, his fingers rediscovering a rhythm he'd forgotten. The sun warmed his back, and the garden's sounds wrapped around him. The rustle of leaves, the chatter of voices, the distant giggle of a child. For the first time in months, he wasn't just passing time. He was part of something. Weeks slipped by, and Harold became a fixture in the garden. He learned names, swapped stories over chipped mugs of coffee, and brought tools from home that hadn't seen daylight in years. One day, a boy with wide, curious eyes tugged at his sleeve. "Can you show me how to plant these?" he asked, clutching a seedling. Harold smiled, guiding the boy's small hands into the soil, showing him how to nestle the roots gently. "Like this?" the boy asked. "Exactly," Harold said, a swell of pride rising in his chest. "You're a natural." The garden grew, and so did Harold. He helped plan a harvest festival where the community gathered under strings of lights, sharing pies and painting faces. Standing amid the chaos, children darting past, adults clapping him on the back, he marveled at the life he'd stumbled into. Mrs. Thompson found him later, her eyes twinkling. "You've done wonders here, Harold," he chuckled. "I think it's the other way around." Back home, he picked up the Paris postcard again. "Wish you were here." It read on the back, but now it felt less like a taunt and more like an invitation. The next day, he booked a trip to Paris, a dream dusted off and made real. As he packed, the postcard tucked in his pocket, he felt A thrill not just for the journey ahead, but for the one he'd already begun. He'd found his place not in a far-off city, but here in the laughter of a boy he'd taught, in the stew shared by a neighbor, in the soil that had brought him back to life. And as he boarded the plane, Harold knew this wasn't an ending, but a beginning, a testament to how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, turning loneliness into purpose, and a forgotten man into a cornerstone of his community. Maybe, he thought, we all have a postcard of our own, waiting for the right moment to inspire us. What's yours?